Before you raise and support the vehicle, take a breaker bar and a 21mm socket, break the lug nuts free while the vehicle is on the ground. Raise and support your vehicle. Since the lug nuts are loose, I can use the socket and finish removing them. Remove the wheel, place it aside. Start by grabbing the caliper before you remove it, and pushing it, pulling it outward to try to compress it, so that when we go to unbolt it, it will slide away from the brake pads. I'm going to take a 14mm wrench, see if I can break these free. They're pretty tight. I'm going to use a diblow mallet. Break that one free. Do the same with the bottom one. Those loose, I can switch to a ratcheting wrench. Use a ratcheting wrench to finish removing these. Now these are actually the slide bolts. When you pull them out, so what I'm going to do, this lower slide bolt, the control arm is in the way. I can't pull it out. I'm just going to roll the brake caliper down. Just going to thread the lower bolt back in a little bit, that way it stays put. I can remove the brake pads. Use a flat-bladed screwdriver or a small pry bar. These ones are pretty stuck. Small screwdriver. That's okay if they fall on the floor. Old brake pads anyways. I'm not too worried about the rear one if I can't get it out, because I've kind of released the pressure from it by removing the front one. I'm going to unbolt the bracket and I'm just going to pull the whole thing off together. I'm going to remove the two 19mm caliper bracket bolts. The lower one is here. The upper one is here. I'm going to start with the upper one. The 19mm wrench on here. Take my diblow mallet, break it free. With the top one loosened, I will loosen the lower one. Same thing, I'll use a diblow mallet to break it free. Since these are loose, I'm going to switch to a ratchet, a 19mm socket to speed removal. I get that one pretty loose, but not all the way out. I want to work on the bottom one. So I need an extension. All right. Try an extension in here, put the ratchet out here, use 19mm socket and extension. Remove the lower nut, lower bolt, finish removing the top one, hold on to the bracket because it will become loose. Needs a little persuasion. It's frozen in there. So now I can unscrew, take off our slide pin bolts, lay the caliper up here for now. Take a bungee cord, just hold it up and out of the way. The e-brake should be released, but this is pretty rusty. There might be a rust ridge in here. I'm going to try to get this rotor off. Normally there's a rubber cap here. You'd pop that out and you can reach the adjuster and turn the adjuster in to pull the e-brake shoes, which are inside here, together to help release this rotor. You may have to do that. I'm going to try spraying some rust penetrant around the edge of the hub and around the studs. I'm going to give it a couple whacks with our dead blow hammer. See if the rotor will just come right off. Otherwise, I'll have to work on releasing the e-brake. All You might get lucky and it slid right off without having to release the adjustment. If you had to release the adjustment, you'd use this access hole and you'd go through here and turn this so the shoes would pull themselves in here. There are 4 bolts that hold in the back of the wheel bearing. It's a bolt-in style. There's one here, one here, one here, and one over here. They go all the way through and they bolt into the wheel bearing assembly, which is now exposed here. I can spray rust penetrant on the back side of the bolts. Try not to get any on your brake shoes. It's not a big deal. We'll clean it with some brake parts cleaner afterwards. This is your parking brake assembly in here. The hub can come out without disturbing this stuff. If you're worried about disturbing it, you should take a picture of it with your phone so you remember how it goes back together. Now I can take a 17mm socket extension and a breaker bar. I'm going to go behind and start loosening the bolts. Start with this one over here. Give it a good push. Get that one loose. Switch up to the next one. Those loose, I'll switch to a ratchet. All right, all the bolts are removed. Try to pull this out. It's cut kind of a lip and it sits in a bore that's inside the knuckle. So I'm gonna hold it, take a dead blow and knock it. I can just see a little gap starting to open up. I'm going to spray some rust penetrant in there. It doesn't go deep into the knuckle. Just need to break that seal. Let's see if I can spray some under here. Can't really reach under there. It's okay. It should run down. Keep hitting it. I've taken 2 of these original bolts, I've threaded them in sort of halfway. And then what I'm going to do, they're on opposite side, I've got a punch and a hammer, and I'm going to try to drive out the wheel bearing assembly evenly. So I've used those bolts with the punch to push it loose. So now it's just hanging on the bolts. I'm gonna go in and remove those again. I'm gonna hold the hub because it's very loose. As soon as I take this bolt out, it's gonna wanna fall. It's just gonna slide out between all the parking brake stuff. You can see this is the little bore that it was in. It gets rusted and it was stuck. That's why I had to hit it out with a punch using the bolts. Here is our old hub and wheel bearing assembly from our vehicle. This is our new one from oneaauto.com. You can see it's the same lug pattern, same style hub where your wheel would sit. They're both bolt-in. Got the same style bore and lip that will fit into the knuckle, and it's bolt-in. So if your wheel bearing's making noise, this brand new one from oneaauto.com will make your car quiet again. I'm going to take some rust penetrant and a wire brush and just try to clean up this opening from any loose big pieces of rust as best I can. It will help the new wheel bearing seat in position. With that, I can take some brake parts cleaner and just clean up in there. Clean up our brake pads. Clean up our brake shoes for our parking brake, e-brake. Now's a good time to inspect them. These look to be in great condition, so we're gonna leave them alone. I can just mention, this is a plastic dust cover. It just slides out, slides back in. Our car does not have ABS, so there's no ABS sensor we had to worry about. That just sits in there. I've cleaned this bore up. Take our new wheel bearing assembly and slide it between brake shoes. Get it seated. It's a little tight, which is good. I'm going to use a dead blow to tap it into place. Capture our bolts. Once you've got the holes lined up, the bolts should thread right in my hand. Using a socket and ratchet to tighten them down. Torque on these is 58 to 68. I've set my torque wrench to 60 foot-pounds. Install the new rotor. I'm going to start by installing it backwards. This way I can clean the oil off it that keeps it from corroding and shipping. I'm going to clean the inside because that's where the parking brake shoes are going to run. Take a rag, wipe down any excess. Down the inside. Flip it over. Install it over the studs. Since the new rotor is brand new, it's thicker, and it won't fit over our parking brake shoes. So we need to spin the auto adjuster in to give us more clearance. And I'm just going to turn it up with this flat bladed screwdriver. It's going to pull the shoes in. This is an automatic adjustment, so as soon as you pull the handbrake a couple times, or the parking brake handle, it will adjust out and it latches. So these little notches lock against the spring, so once it goes this way, it can't spin back. It has to be flipped back manually by doing this. Since I touched them, I'm just going to clean them off with brake parts cleaner. Let's try our rotor this time. There it is. So it should slide over with no resistance. I'll take a lug nut to hold the rotor in place. We're going to remove the brake pad clips. They're stainless. We can clean them up and reuse them. Just use a flat bladed screwdriver, pop them out. Pop out both sides. Also going to clean where they sit. Take some brake parts cleaner, wire brush. Knock off the loose stuff. Repeat for the other side. I can clean the clips, brake parts cleaner. Metal brush. Reinstall them, caliper bracket. Clip back into place. This is ready to go back on the car. I'm gonna unhook our brake caliper. Just gonna lay it there for a second. You need to compress the piston inside here. Use our C-clamp and an old brake pad Just gently compress the caliper piston in. That's good. Place these aside. Before we can install the bracket fully, the lower slide pin that has the rubber bushing on it has to go through the caliper. You can actually start threading it in a little bit. It's going to sit here because the suspension arm is in the way. I can't slide it in. So it needs to sit like this. Now I can line up the bracket. Capture the top bolts. Now I can capture the lower bolt. Start tightening the bolt. Before you go too far, I skipped it, but we're going to do it now. Clean this brake rotor surface down from the protective oil that it's shipped with. You can wipe off any excess with a rag. Now we can install our pads. We're going to make sure that we didn't touch the surface of the pad. If you did, you can just clean it with some brake parts cleaner. Put a little bit of caliper grease on the ears. Again, same thing, make sure these pads are nice and clean. A little bit of caliper grease. I'll place the outside pad in here. Slide our caliper back over. Push the little boot in. Slide our caliper pins in here. Thread them in. When I had this rotor off and we were cleaning up, I actually found the rubber plug that belongs in here. I'm going to replace that. I'm going to torque the brake caliper carrier bolts, these two big ones back here. Torque is 116 to 144, so I got my torque wrench set to 120 foot-pounds. This top one, I don't need the extension. Caliper slide pins, torque is 28 to 35. Got my torque wrench set to 30. Final step, after installing the wheel and torquing the lug nuts when the car is on the ground, gently step on the brake pedal, and what that's going to do is bring the caliper piston out to meet the pads. See right now the brake caliper is loose, it's moving on its slide pins. When you step on the brakes, it pulls it in, pulls the brakes to the rotor. That's what helps you stop. So we need to bring that piston out so it takes up the gap that's here, and you'll be able to stop. We'll install the wheel. Thread them on by hand first. Torque on these is 72 to 85. I've got the torque wrench set to 80 foot-pounds. A cross pattern. The wheel is installed and torqued.
Thanks for watching. Visit us at oneauto.com for quality auto parts, fast and free shipping, and the best customer service in the industry.